So, welcome, Jenny Kleeman. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm very interested in your writing, specifically The Price of Life. Not only that, you're a journalist, broadcaster, and obviously you've written The Price of Life and The Sex Robots and Vegan Meat. Yeah, absolutely brilliant books. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you got to this place in your career and how you got to the point of wanting to be an author?
Wow, it's been a long journey. So I didn't start out thinking that I wanted to be a journalist. In fact, when I left university, I wanted to be a musician.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, oh, I'll be a freelance journalist, and that will give me the freedom when
Yeah.
I become a rock star. Uh, it will give me freedom to pursue musical things. And fortunately for the world, the music career did not take off, but the journalism career, because I'm much better at being a journalist than I am making music. But I've always worked in different media at the same time. So I've always been writing things for newspapers and at the same time as working in broadcast, so working in television or working in radio. I grew up in a house where there were newspapers all the time, but the things that I really loved were the magazines that arrived at the weekend.
Mhm.
I would love the kind of feeling of that's had some really substantial, properly told, interesting story, well reported.
Mm.
And from when I was very little, I always loved that. And I loved this, documentaries as well, feature-length documentaries and kind of crazy stories. I'm the youngest of four girls in my family, and
Wow.
all my sisters are very loud. And
Mhm.
so to get any kind of attention at the dinner table, you'd have to have something really interesting to say. So I was always looking for kind of crazy stories. So I could be like,
Yeah.
you got to listen to this, get a load of this, but also wanting to do them in a way that was meaningful, that wasn't just sensationalized,
Mm.
that had a kind of wider import for humanity. So I started off doing short-term television contracts, and then in between, I would just pitch stories. And some of the pitches that I sent, I looked at them recently, they were very, very bad, but I carried on and eventually got commissions and started writing a lot for The Guardian and got more and more commissions there, got more and more confident. And then eventually, in 2017, thought I had a kind of set of ideas that was big enough for a book. And I was lucky enough to get a book deal. And I love writing books. I mean, I make radio shows and I write articles, but writing books, it's an enormous privilege to get to do it, not just because
Mm.
I really enjoy the writing, which involves, sitting right where I am now and writing. This is where the books were written. Uh,
Oh,
but but I really love this part of writing books, which is meeting readers and
yeah.
going and talking to people at festivals and engaging with people, because books people are really, really nice people. So
Yeah, we are.
yeah, you are. And so it just feels like an enormous privilege to get to do this.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, you did a festival recently, didn't you? For
Yeah.
your yeah, for the Price
I
of
do
Life.
festivals I do them very often. I was in Birmingham Literature Festival last weekend. I'm doing a literature festival in Gibraltar and in Ghent
Oh.
in a couple of weeks. I've been
Oh.
just this year. I've been to Portugal and I've been to Paris. I've been to all sorts of different places talking about my book. So it's
Yeah.
wonderful to do that, but also to be in such lovely company with other book people. It's really nice.
Yeah, I feel like when I first joined the book community, everyone was so lovely and so accepting. So no, I definitely get what you mean there. I'm interested because you kind of said that you like well-reported journalism. Obviously, like you, that makes perfect sense. So I'm interested, what kind of makes a well-reported piece to you? Like, what were you drawn to when you were younger?
Depth, so things that aren't just sort of splashy headlines,
Mhm.
and things that are beautifully structured, that draw you into a completely different world, uh,
Mm.
where you learn something unexpected, where it's not just a sensationalist headline and then a few details. And in fact, I've got a lot of my stories from reading them in tabloids or in the Daily Mail, where they are stories done in the opposite way to how I do them. So
Yeah,
it doesn't mean to
interesting.
say that those places don't have value. They do. I mean, they break a lot of stories, but they don't tell them in a way that I would want to do it, which is
Mm.
thoughtful way where you're thinking, okay, this happened, but what does it mean that we're living in a society where something like this happens? Or,
Yeah.
what can we learn from this person's experience beyond voyeuristically looking at what's happened to them? So,
Mm.
so it's to do with doing things with nuance in a way that isn't sensationalized, doing things with depth, but also crafting the storytelling so that you are bringing your reader by the hand into a world in which they want to stay, and they want you to be their guide in that world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's such a perfect way to describe my experience when I was reading The Price of Life, because you were such a perfect narrator as well to it, because it was a very heavy subject, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, oh my God, just the way you described that was so perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the thing also with books, the difference between books and writing articles and doing radio programs or TV programs, which I hadn't realized until I was writing a book,
Mhm.
is that in all those other mediums, you have editors who have the final say. So
Yeah.
strike things out and say, that's not going to be published, that's not going to be broadcast. Whereas with a book, you have the final say, which
Yeah.
is both wonderful but very exposing. And
Mhm.
my books are very much written in my voice, and that's not to say that my articles aren't, but sometimes there's less of my personality in my articles. So
Yeah.
my books are me very much being myself. So
Yeah.
if you felt that way.
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. So what was the journey you went on with The Price of Life? Because it took you so many places.
Yeah.
So what was that kind of lead up to thinking I need to write this down?
The lead up was I was looking into effective altruism and how the wealthiest people in the world are giving their money away.
Okay.
I went to San Francisco in November 2019 to do some reporting on that. I went to see this foundation where the richest man in San Francisco, who's Dustin Moskovitz, because
Yeah.
live outside San Francisco, how he's giving his fortune away.
Hmm.
And the idea being of this approach, effective altruism, being that you have to have a scientific approach to doing good. You have to be giving with your head and not your heart, giving to maximize the number of lives saved, kind
Mm.
of gamifying philanthropy. That if you can work out the most efficient and most effective way to give your money away, then you can be sure you've saved the maximum number of lives.
Mm.
So different from the way that I approach things, because I'm very much a words person, not a numbers person. I, very much guided by empathy. The whole
Hmm.
principle behind effective altruism is that you should not be swayed by empathy with a feeling of connection to anyone. You should be purely giving your money where it can go furthest.
Yeah.
I felt like it was quite perverse. And it was, it involved people being prepared to ask very difficult questions like,
Hmm.
when should you intervene to save someone's life? Is it better if you save the life of a newborn, or if you save the life of a woman with children? And
Mm.
they actually like make graphs about all of this stuff. Anyway, I'm telling you this at far too much length.
Yeah.
But this was in 2019.
Mm.
And one of the things, there were several things that they were giving tens of billions of dollars away to. And the two biggest cause areas that they were pursuing, this foundation that I went to visit, was malevolent AI and bioengineered pandemics, counteracting those things. And I remember
Oh.
thinking, like, these guys are ridiculous. They're too much money. Pandemics,
Honestly.
runaway AI. This is just Bond villain kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months later,
Mm.
pandemic came, and I thought, oh my God, maybe these people are actually onto something. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, with the pandemic, all of a sudden, governments around the world are making these very, very serious calculations about, is it right if young people don't, children don't go to school to save old people? Is it right if the economy shuts down in order to save lives? And I realized actually that all over the world, all the time, in various different environments and industries, people are constantly putting prices on human lives and working out who's
Yeah.
the cheapest and whose lives are most expensive. Just we aren't talking about it, and that perhaps it would take someone like me, who is not a numbers person, to go into these numbers with a kind of not an economist's eye, but with a curious, empathetic eye, and look,
Mhm.
what do we lose and what do we gain by putting numbers on lives?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of preface the book a little bit with that as well. It's just
Yeah.
saying, like, you know, these are conversations we need to be having because it exists. And as you said, like, what is it, genetically engineered pandemics, or have I
Yeah.
mixed up?
Yes, bioengineered pandemics. Yeah.
Bioengineered pandemics, and it's just kind of, it's very niche, but it's definitely something that we should be talking about. And I'm really interested because you looked at such an expansive range of areas where lives are quantified. Like, how did you think to do all of these areas? Like, how did you come up with that?
I made a list. I mean, this is the thing. So I had this idea that I was every chapter was going to be a number, and it was going to be a number of a different price put on life according to a different facet of how that happens. So, you know, how much will the NHS spend to save your life? What's the average ransom demand? How much does a cadaver, a dead human body cost?
Mm-hmm.
All of it. How much does a hitman charge? And so when you write a book, you write a book proposal. And
Mm-hmm.
I write a proposal, and in this proposal, I had to break down what each chapter was. So I did it as a kind of exercise that I tried to see how many different prices I could come up with. And in fact, some of the ones in the proposal um, weren't weren't in the final thing, and there were many things that I added, like for example, the price of creating a life. I didn't think about fertility treatment at that stage.
Yeah.
So it was a proper kind of back of fag packet thing of me coming up with a list of numbers that could tell you different things about different places. And it was a really interesting exercise, actually. I really enjoyed doing that part of the research.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think I like the way that you had sectioned it all out because it makes a lot, yeah, just kind of reading it, you wouldn't necessarily think to look into like
Yeah.
fertility treatment. What didn't make it into the book, if you don't mind me asking?
There were some things. There's a thing that I wanted to write about, which is about. In fact, it is in the book, but it is a kind of paragraph in the book rather than being an entire chapter. And it's about. It's called wrongful birth. It's about when people give birth to a baby that
Yes, yeah.
they wouldn't have given birth to had they known. There was it had a diagnostic test showing that their baby would be severely disabled. And there have been several kind of legal cases where people have sued the NHS because they are living with a disabled child who they wouldn't have given birth to had they known the child was disabled.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, I decided to include it in the book, but I thought you couldn't, I couldn't spend 5 or 6,000 words on that as a subject because it's just incredibly sad. And you have these parents who very much
Yeah.
love their children. It's not that they don't want their children to have been born, but they have to stand up in court and argue that they wouldn't have wanted their child to be born. So I thought, actually, I couldn't write an entire chapter on this.
No, that's so tough. And yeah, even just reading that, because I remember reading that section and it's extremely tough for the mothers and the fathers that have to say it. I think you quoted someone in there that kind of said, like, you know, I love my son so much, but that would have been the situation. And yeah, actually arguing that in court where it can be quite sterile, like, you know,
Yeah.
these.
And then it's quoted in newspapers. And
Yeah, well, exactly. So I think, so you said I'm so sorry, I've forgotten her name, but
Moratil, I think. Yeah.
yeah, and she had, yeah, loads of articles written about her that kind of just said, oh, mother would have given up son, you know, that kind of thing. And it's just, yeah,
Yeah, it's really, really tough, and that's going to be there whenever you Google her. But yeah,
yeah.
I mean, the part of the challenge of the book was balancing the dark and the light and the tone
Mhm.
shifts in tone, because some parts of the book are quite ridiculous and silly, and some parts are quite funny,
Mm.
and some parts are really, really sad and really bleak, and some parts I felt extremely morally I felt like I was in really difficult territory because I was talking to bereaved people about, you know, the prices put on their loved ones' lives, and they
Mm.
knew that that was the book that I was writing, and you know,
Yeah.
when they agreed to speak to me, but still, it's not territory that I was very comfortable in. So it was a large part of the book was the challenge of handling the tone and moving between those
Mm.
quite dark bits and also the really sort of silly and hopefully quite funny, light-hearted bits.
Yeah, there definitely was. I think the funniest bits of when you kind of said like questions that you would have asked but decided not to in the moment. I think those were the bits that kind of did make
Yeah,
it lighter.
I did also interview some quite crazy people, including the man whose job it is to sell dead bodies, who
Yeah.
was quite a character. So
He
there are,
sounded it when you described him. So there was kind of a big connection that I found between, and kind of what we're talking about now as well, between the two books. And it's just empathy, like your focus on empathy. And I think in sex robots and vegan meat, specifically with, the sex robot
Yeah.
side of things, you are talking about the lack of empathy in relationships and the fact that you don't have to care about this person.
Yeah.
They are engineered for your pleasure. And then, kind of talking about the price of life, you do have to extract empathy from these things. So I'm interested in your opinion on where we're going as a society empathetically.
That's so, nobody has asked me that or drawn that connection between both of my books. And I think it's very astute. It's true. I hadn't really thought
Thank
about
you.
that. I hadn't really thought about the price of life, that it is about empathy. I think that if I think emotional intelligence in general is so important, and it's going to be a superpower in the future when we are more and more used to interacting with AIs and AI generated content where you don't have to think, what was the thinking process behind this? Or how is this person feeling? Or infer internal emotional states because it's not something with an emotional state that has produced that. I think it's going to be a lot harder because it's a muscle that we will not have exercised. And I think those people who have emotional intelligence will be able to do fantastically well in the world because they'll be able to navigate, and particularly things like, for example, I think as we spend longer on devices and are more used to avoiding difficult conversations like ghosting people, when I mean, I'm not that old, but when I was younger, like you would never break up with somebody by ghosting them, or you would never sort of turn down a job opportunity by just not replying to an email or not turning up to an interview or things like that. It just was a thing. You had to learn how to have those uncomfortable conversations. And I think people don't know how to have difficult conversations. And that's why there is, in some respect, a real hunger for people who can teach people how to communicate or how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
I think we're going into a world where empathy is harder, but those people who can have emotional intelligence or who can listen to people and work out what they really mean are going to be gold dust. Well, that's what I hope, because that's supposedly what my skill is.
Yeah. I mean, massively, yeah, based on the book. Yeah,
Thank you.
massively.
I do think that. I do think that. And I also think it's not just about emotional intelligence and empathy, but it is also about listening. I think people don't really listen, and I'm forced to listen because I can show you what I have been doing today. It's not plugged in. I spend most of my days transcribing. Here it is. I spend most of my days listening to interviews and transcribing them. Even though I have AIs that transcribe it, I'm still listening and marking up of how did they say it? What does it mean that they said it like that? And really thinking about how people are saying things to me. And actually, when you're interviewing people and you're taking notes and they lose their train of thought and they say, oh, what was I saying? And being able to say, you were talking about this. And
Yeah.
being like, oh, you're really listening to me. It means that you have a bond with people that people are not used to, because people are used to just waiting for their turn to speak and other people just not listening. So
That's so true. There's this thing online about like, oh, it's not that deep, and people are like kind of going against that and saying actually things have a lot of depth, and the way someone says something, like obviously you've just said, like the way someone says something and what parts in their sentence they are getting distracted by, like, oh, what came up in your brain just then when you got distracted. I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. Why did you not finish that thought? And the other thing is something that you learn as a journalist from having done it for a long time. When you start out, you're quite you don't want to look stupid. So if people are talking about something that you don't understand, you think, oh, I'll look it up when I get home. Then you realize that you can't use that bit because the person was talking in a way that your audience wouldn't understand.
Okay.
Using
Yeah.
language that your audience wouldn't understand. If you don't understand it, then your audience won't understand it. But it takes a lot of experience and maturity to know that, and to actually, if you don't understand something, it's not because you're stupid, it's because it's not clear. So now when I say to people all the time, like when people use, for example, acronyms or letters all the time, like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Or that place, I didn't catch that. Can you spell it for me? Because you really need
Yeah.
this stuff. So you learn from painful experience about having nodded along and not really listened or not hadn't understood that. Um,
Yeah.
and people appreciate you wanting to really understand them.
It's so important just asking those questions and saying, what do you mean by that? And people
Exactly.
asking people to
In
expand.
what way?
Yeah.
How did you feel? You must have felt, or all of those things of really drilling down. Like sometimes, you'll have an interviewee who's gone through something extraordinary, and they'll say something like, "It was devastating," and they need to tell you in what way it was devastating. Like, how did
Yeah.
it affect their life? Because that's the thing that's going to make the reader. Because of course it's devastating to lose a child or to, but you need to actually unpack those things. But
Yeah.
you learn that from horrible, bitter experience of like not having that right thing and thinking like, I felt so moved during that interview, and yet what I've got on paper that they've said doesn't convey that. And it's learning to tease out those things so that you can make your reader understand why it was so emotionally impactful for you.
Definitely. Like, what does devastating mean to
Yes.
you? Because it's
Yes.
going to be so
But
nuanced.
yeah, but it's as simple as, well, tell me, what was life like then? Were you finding it hard to sleep? Oh yeah, I couldn't sleep at all, or I wasn't eating, or
Mm.
my marriage broke down, or those are the things that they mean a lot more than it was devastating.
Yeah, no, definitely. And obviously, you've had a lot of difficult conversations in the price of life specifically. And there was one area where you were kind of talking about the terror attacks,
Yeah.
and there was an element of kind of quantifying someone's life based off of whether they have dependents. And I was really interested on your view on then obviously living people, sorry to put it so crudely, but it and their value based off of whether they have children and what that kind of would then mean, yeah, in a slightly more expansive way.
Well, there are so many different ways of trying to put a value on human lives, and one of them is looking at how many years ahead you have when your life is taken. The other is how many other people are depending on you, and there
Mm-hmm.
is no one right answer.
Mm-hmm.
This is the whole thing. I think obviously if you've got dependents and you are out of the picture, those people need to be taken care of, and so the value of your life is more. But then if you're looking at in terms of health economics, it's worth more to save the life of a younger person without dependents, because in terms of the value that they could provide to society through their work and through their taxes, and
Mm-hmm.
there is no one single answer, which is a good thing, because I think sometimes in this country or in the world we fetishize parenthood and people who have children and the contribution they make,
Yeah.
and that is only one form of value.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting in that chapter about compensation in a terrorist attack. I had kind of, well, I mean, there's so much in that chapter, and there were so many things that
Yeah.
really shocked me. But I had kind of gone into that thinking it was so unfair that people got such different amounts.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the question of, is it fair that people get? Would it be fair if people got the same amounts if somebody had, if somebody was a young person and their parents got this huge payout,
Mm.
equivalent to someone who had 4 children, and
Yeah.
it would be shared between them. So there is no right answer in all of this. Things have to be looked at in a case by case basis, but it's the process of the decision making that makes it so interesting, because it's about what it tells us about who we are right now and how we live today.
Yeah, I guess, and yeah, kind of like what adds value to your life, what
Yeah.
doesn't add value.
Yeah.
I thought it was super interesting the French legislation when it came
Yeah.
to like bereavement. Like you do it almost. I think the way that you described it, or the way that they maybe described it in the legislation, was that you do it based off of the level of bereavement that it is. So like your relationship to the person that's died.
To the person who's died. Is it your parent? Is it your spouse? Is it your grandchild? And
Yeah.
I think that's to do with the fact that France has had some really horrific terrorist attacks over the past 10, 15 years, and they've had to think really clearly about how, and this is specifically a fund for the victims of terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that in this country. Victims of terrorism, their family get the same amount of money as anyone who had been murdered. So there is no special provision. And also, it's a
Mm-hmm.
lump sum of £11,000 to be shared among the family. And I do think £11,000 is such a strange sum.
Yeah, it seems really strange.
It's not small enough that you can complain that it's
Mm.
nothing. It's not nothing. But what are you supposed to do with that money?
Yeah. Like, what is that meant to pay for?
Yeah, what is that
Have you
meant
got something in
to do?
mind?
Yeah, what can you do with £11,000? I don't know. Do up
Yeah.
part of your house.
Yeah.
It's a very strange sum of money, and it's I don't know if it would be better if there was nothing, because then you could campaign for something much better and much fairer than this 11 grand lump sum.
Yeah. Definitely, because I think it was the Hertz compensation as well. That people were able to be compensated more if it was, yeah, they were specifically hurt by the vehicle.
Yeah.
How do you think this has changed you as a person, like doing all of this research? Because you said that you don't think it's called moral progress, but it's definitely
Yes.
changed you.
Made me more comfortable talking about things that are pretty
Mm,
great values put on life.
mm,
It's made me realize the real benefits of using the price of life as a tool as
mhm,
to expose unfairness. So in terms of this criminal injury compensation, you know, the fact that people who are killed by terrorists with a vehicle
mm,
can get so many hundred times more money than the families of those killed by the same terrorists seconds later with knives. The price of life is a tool to show us incredible injustice. Same thing with fertility treatment. Are we
mm,
comfortable living in a world where only the biologically fortunate and the wealthy get to reproduce? And
mhm.
you know, and maybe we are, or maybe we're not. And if we're not, are we prepared to subsidize fertility treatment with higher taxes? I don't know if we are, but we are
Yeah.
living in that world. And so it's changed me because it's made me more willing to look at how numbers can help us
Mhm,
in a way that I wasn't before. Because I came to this very kind of annoyed that the value of things as a words person, as an empathy
mm.
person, is reduced to likes or book sales or anything to do with numbers,
Yeah.
value of things.
Yeah.
And so I was quite resistant to it. So it's changed me in that I'm less resistant to it. I see the benefit of it, but I also see how dangerous it can be if you think that that's the only thing you need to know to assess the value of a person.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we are kind of valuing ourselves as well, as you say, like with the numbers online, we're valuing our beauty, for example, or our intellect based off of how many likes we get. Whereas actually that could have moved three people and completely changed their worldview, but you're not going to see that because it hasn't popped up as
Yeah, it
like.
doesn't. It's not a number. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to go any further with like this specific research? Like, do you want to do anything else with it? Not necessarily like a second book, but anything else you wanted to do with it?
Well, stories always lead to more stories, and that's the beautiful thing about doing these kinds of events is that people ask questions that make you really, really think. Uh,
Mm,
and there are lots of other things that have come up as a consequence of writing this book that have made me that have given me kernels of ideas for other stories.
mm,
But I think, I don't know, I'm looking for now one big story that I can tell maybe in my next book, because all the things that I've done so far have been kind of little stories grouped together in a theme.
yeah.
Looking for the kind of big story that I can tell next.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait for that. I'll be keeping my eye out, definitely. Are you reading anything at the moment?
At the moment, I am reading Jonathan Friedland's book, The Traitor's Circle, because I'm doing an event with him for Intelligence Squared in a couple of weeks. I'm just looking over to see what it is because I was going to flash
Yeah.
it to the camera, but it's too far away. Which is a book about it's a book about German people in Nazi Germany who put themselves at great personal risk to oppose the Nazis, and how
Yeah.
they were and how there was a traitor among them who stitched them up. And it's a very cleverly written book in that it's really well researched. It's an excellent piece of journalism, but
Mm,
chapter is like a sort of thriller. It's like a kind of cliffhanger.
mm.
So I'm
Okay.
reading that at the moment, but there are lots of things that I read because of work, um,
Yeah.
and don't get enough time to read for pleasure. I've always got a couple of, I've always got an audiobook on the go, and I've always got something that I'm reading on the go.
Yeah. Are you fiction or non-fiction?
Well, I normally read non-fiction, but then when I'm on holiday, I like to read really good fiction and see what all the fuss is about. So I'm quite unimaginative with fiction. I read things that um, a lot of people have already said is good, because I
Yeah.
read it so rarely that I don't get to that I just really don't want to be disappointed when I do read it. So I've read
Yeah.
things that are really, really good.
Yeah.
Recently, yeah.
Well, I suppose that's the benefit of it, isn't it? If you're really being so selective. I'm the exact same. I don't read much fiction. I'll read 1 or 2 fiction books a year. So they have to be really good. So if someone could only read one chapter of The Price of Life, what would you want it to be?
I would say it's probably the one about criminal injury compensation and
Mhm.
because that's the one where I was so shocked in the reporting of it, and I feel like I really uncovered something
Mm.
whilst looking into it. But it's not much fun. There are other ones that are more fun. The one about the guy whose dad faked his own death, I quite
Yeah,
like that one.
that was a crazy one.
Without insurance. But
Mm.
it would probably be the criminal injury compensation one, just because it tells us so much about how wrong things can be,
Mm.
and how nobody knows about it because they don't ask the questions.
Yeah, it covered a lot, and I feel like it was really like quintessential to the actual subject matter. Like it really explained the price of life. Have you got any like feedback that you've remembered, like any kind of reviews or anything that has come of the book that you've really remembered?
Oh, there's lots of things. Quite often when I quite often when I do events about the price of life, live events, there'll be someone in the audience who says, "I'm an economist, and I don't like the way you," and that's always quite frightening. Though
Yeah.
I had some really, really nice reviews and really nice feedback. Really nice. Perhaps the most meaningful for me was the Price of Life was Book of the Week on Radio 4, which means
Mm.
that it was kind of broken down. Five of the chapters became 5 episodes of Book of the Week. And in fact, it was amazing. They got someone to abridge it, which was incredible. Like someone, I didn't realize the talent of abridging things. Someone had managed to make each chapter shorter without me even really noticing. It was
It's
really beautifully
crazy.
done.
Yeah.
And so I read those chapters out. And the first episode was, there's a chapter in the book which is very sad, which is about a murder. It's about the murder of a 17-year-old boy, Shaquan Sammy Plummer,
Mm.
really near where I'm talking to you from right now. And so that was episode 1 of Book of the Week on Radio 4. And Radio 4 people listen to it around the world.
Mm.
Somebody heard that and contacted me through my website to say that he's now living in America, but he had been 4 or 5 doors down from where Shaquan had been stabbed, and he had tried to save his life and was the person who called the ambulance.
Oh my
He
God.
wanted to speak to Shaquan's mother, Jessica.
Mm.
And so I put them in touch with each other. And then he came over to London and they went out and had lunch together. And she was she is just so hungry for any information about what happened to her son. She just
Yeah.
feels sort of perpetually stuck in this loop of grief about him. And for her, it was extremely, it was a really good thing that she
Yeah.
had someone who was with him when he was having his last moments and could talk to her about it. And I think for him it was meaningful too, because he was so troubled by it. This young boy
Mm.
was dying on his doorstep, and so that for me is incredibly meaningful, that I was able to help in that little way facilitate the two of them getting to know each other.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. You're gonna make me cry.
Yeah, no, it's very, very meaningful for me. It was really.
Yeah. I love that. I think like that's a really wonderful place to stop. So thank you so, so much for that. That was such a brilliant conversation. Was there anything you wanted to add at all at the end?
Just that I'm just so grateful, not only that you enjoyed the book, but that you clearly read it with such depth and remember so much from it. And
Yeah.
thank you. It's all you could ever hope for, so thank you.
Oh yeah, no, of course. Well, thank you for putting it out there for me to consume. I've recommended to countless people. So thank you as well.